10 years ago, my mother was turning 70, so my brother and I decided to give her a gift of taking her to Spain. She had never been there, and it was a lifelong dream of hers to visit Spain. And of course, it was a wonderful experience that when we got back, she kept saying over and over again, "I want to go back again." So 5 years later, when she turned 75, my brother and one of my sisters and I took her back to Spain. Side note, she turns 80 next month. But this second trip was a little different than the first, because by that time I had done some work on my family's genealogy and was able to trace some of our lineage on my mother's side all the way back to Spain, to 17th century Spain. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to include a visit to that area of Spain where my mother's family comes from. So we, of course, did the normal routine of going to Barcelona and Seville. And the last leg of our journey was to go to this place, which is in the Extremadura region of Spain. It's on the western part of Spain, almost on the border of Portugal. It's the least touristy part of the country. And because of that, it's, I think, the most beautiful because it's unspoiled. There's hardly any development. And we traced our family to that particular part of Spain. And as part of that, there is a pilgrimage site from I think it was the 14th century, that I'm pretty sure that my mother's family would have visited. And so I thought it would be great to go visit that site while we were in the Extremadura region of Spain. And I thought it would be even further cool if we could actually stay overnight at that pilgrimage site, because the pilgrimage site is actually a monastery, I think from the 15th century or something like that. And a very small part of the monastery, it's not an active monastery anymore, but part of the monastery is they have a hotel. So I thought it'd be cool if we could stay overnight there as well. Well, there were a few mistakes that we made and became very apparent that day. We had decided to travel from Seville by car, so we rented a car because the access by trains was really not possible. And so our first mistake was that we rented a minivan because, there were four of us and we wanted to travel in comfort. Well, if you've ever been to Europe, you know what the size of the streets are like. So we got into our minivan and we drove from Seville to this monastery. Unfortunately, our second mistake was that we left Seville too late, because by the time we got to the area of Extremadura, it was already nighttime. And to get to the town where my family is from and where this monastery is located, here was my brother now driving a minivan up this hillside town through these narrow streets. What's more, our third mistake was that we were relying solely on Google Maps. And you know how Google Maps sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work? Sometimes it takes you through the route you should be going, and sometimes it doesn't. Well, we just kind of went along with Google Maps, and it actually took us through all the twists and turns possible in that little town. And I kid you not, since, again, it's not a touristy part, so they don't see a whole lot of people there, probably not even a whole lot of Spaniards from the rest of the country, let alone Americans. And there we are, and literally, I tell you, there were people on the streets, they would stop, their eyes wide open, and looking at my brother trying to drive this minivan through these narrow streets, and thinking, what are those Americans doing? And sure enough, the lane assist in the car was continually beeping because it was so narrow. And I was on the passenger side telling my brother not how many feet he had of clearance, but inches. My poor brother, his nerves were a wreck. So I was nervous. And then we got to the hotel finally, and it's It's not what you would think. It's not a 5-star lodging. It's probably 2 stars. The 1 star was the fact that they had electricity, they had lighting in there, mostly kind of like a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The 2nd star was that they had in-suite bathrooms. My brother and sister were not impressed. They thought it was creepy, it was spooky, because this was a place where, so many priests had lived and died in these rooms. And I'm like, welcome to my life, thank you. So I went to bed that evening very concerned that I think I had made the wrong decision. I had talked my brother and sister into thinking this was a great idea. My brother's going to be all upset because he had to do that crazy driving, and they slept in what they thought were creepy or spooky rooms. Well, we woke up the next day, and we realized that because we had arrived at night, we really could not even appreciate the beauty of that monastery. And in the light of day, of course, everything was just beaming and just wonderful. And the concerns that we had about getting there or the lodging was just all gone. And of course, everybody was in agreement that it was a worthwhile endeavor. In today's gospel, Jesus is confronted with a question: Lord, will many be saved? And like Jesus usually does in the Gospels, he doesn't always answer the question. He usually turns things upside down. And he does that right here in this gospel. Partly that question is coming from a really kind of a sense of exclusivity. In the time of Jesus, it was a common belief that only a certain number of people would be saved because they were the faithful few. And so that's where that question is coming from, literally saying, well, Lord, who's going to be saved and who's not going to be saved? So Jesus just kind of evades that question, and he says instead in response, strive to pass through the narrow gate. So what is Jesus trying to say there? And then he ends that by saying, or talking about how people from many nations will gather around the table of the Lord in the next life. So Jesus doesn't want to answer the question about who will be saved. He doesn't want to get into the whole exclusivity question. And he ends up talking about people being from various nations being in the kingdom of God. So what's going on here? Well, Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God is more than just membership. It's not just because I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm in. No, our whole lives are a journey towards the kingdom of God. And so our task as disciples is to really be living our faith life very conscientiously, with a heightened awareness of how our actions have consequences in our lives and in the lives of others that we know, we touch, and we meet, and even in the lives of people we will never meet. And that salvation is more than just, again, because we were baptized, but salvation comes from how we live our lives. And what have we done to make this world a better place? Or what have we done to just increase suffering on the lives of people? What does this look like? Well, we could talk about it in terms of a personal sense, kind of our immediate circle of families, and I think we know what that's like in terms of how we're supposed to love each other and support each other and be kind as a family and friends. We're, I think, for the most part, pretty good with that, although we have a lot of work to do yet. But again, just because we do that does not mean we're in. The narrow gate really is more like a narrow street, as my brother had to drive through and navigate. Our whole lives, we should be very much with heightened awareness, as my brother was, as to how we're affecting others. For example, we all love to buy things, don't we, at a reduced price. We love sales. We've actually grown to expect things to be affordable and cheap. Nothing wrong with that. But that comes at an expense. In order to be able to have cheap goods, you then have to have cheap labor to make those goods. And so our crazy society is built on this model where we use cheap labor to be able to sell cheap goods and at the same time maintain profits for shareholders and CEOs. So how do our actions affect others? How do our actions actually break that cycle of poverty? It's a question for us to ponder. We could look at the lives of people of color who face discrimination on a daily basis. And of course, in our contemporary society now, nobody wants to talk about racism because we feel uncomfortable when we get into that discussion. We don't like to feel bad about what has happened or is happening. So we'd rather not talk about it. That's kind of the consensus out there, unfortunately, because it makes us feel uncomfortable. What's our uncomfort compared to the daily discrimination that people of color face? Why are we not addressing this issue? As difficult as it may be, as uncomfortable it may be, why are we allowing racism and discrimination to continue to exist in our country? How do our actions, or inactions in this sense, affect the lives of others? We could look at the lives of the LGBTQ community. You know, we as a church say that all the people of God should be loved and be respected, including people from the LGBTQ community. But do they feel loved? Just because we say, yeah, we love the LGBTQ community, does not mean that they actually feel that they are loved. So obviously our work is not done. We have more to do yet. How do our actions and our inactions affect the lives of those around us? My friends, that's where salvation will be found, in that hard work of living our faith life not casually, not really just kind of without putting much thought to it, but rather living our life with a heightened awareness. What does my faith require of me in this moment in time? As I make this turn in my life, as I choose this direction, this action, what does my faith tell me I need to do? It's hard work, but that's what Jesus is asking of us. And then, as I said, he kind of concludes that story or the interchange with that person, talking about people from different nations being there that person would not have expected to be there. It's a kingdom of inclusivity, not exclusivity. And for us, I think the same holds true. I think we will be surprised when we get to heaven, if we get to heaven, we will be surprised by who is there. People that we did not expect, perhaps, to be there. But they'll be there. Why? Because they've had to live their lives with heightened awareness, because their lives required it of them. So the poor, every time they go make a purchase that we easily make because it's cheap goods, they have to figure out, can they afford even this cheap good? They live their lives with heightened awareness. People of color as well have to live their lives with heightened awareness, because every social interaction that they make could potentially be an experience of discrimination or even violence against them. And they can't hide their ethnicity. So it's a daily thing for them. So they live their lives with heightened awareness already. Members of the LGBTQ community as well. They face the terrible prospect of violence being done to them of even their lives being taken away from them, not just in third world countries, but even here in the United States. They live their lives with heightened awareness. And those lives are not easy. And our lives should not be easy either as Christians. The thing about this, though, my friends, as Jesus makes very clear to us, is that if we strive through the narrow gate, we will get there. And we have not any need to worry about who will be saved or if we will be saved. Because we will have been judged worthy. Because we lived our lives according to the gospel. Because we concerned ourselves with how our actions are going to affect everyone. And as tiresome and as difficult as that may be, the promise is that one day we shall wake up, just like my brothers and sisters and I did in Extremadura, and realize that we've arrived at a most glorious place and that our lives were worth it.